Are you a student or an educator and worried about ChatGPT? Hi, I'm Jim. I'm a fiction writer, poet, and university instructor. And in this video, I want to share a presentation that I gave for a recent ChatGPT symposium at Bronx Community College, which was to intro and discuss some of the ideas related to worries that people had about ChatGPT, students, staff, faculty, and I was able to give my non-expert opinion based on my experience and my research as an educator, as a writer. And I hope that you find this useful because I think that these are technologies that will continue to evolve and become more and more a part of our lives. And as students and as educators, we need to be familiar with these technologies, and I will argue use them as well. Okay, so this is ChatGPT, a brief intro. When you look at this first slide, the cover, hopefully you notice this really cool image that I put as the background. This is an AI generated image. Now I did slightly alter the image by putting the logo of ChatGPT right here, like on the forehead, sort of. I try to make that look intentional. But other than that, this is an image developed by or generated by deep AI. And the prompt was something like sentient AI. And this cool image popped up. And this gives you, if you haven't heard of generative AI, a glimpse into the level of development and ingenuity that these technologies can create. They're called generative AI because they generate things, they create things. So with a simple prompt, this AI was able to develop this complex, kind of stunning looking image. Let's start off with a broad definition of ChatGPT. I will use simplified language, and then we'll move on to ways in which ChatGPT and other like technologies, how students and educators may use these technologies. First off, ChatGPT is an artificial intelligence or AI chatbot developed by OpenAI. I want to talk more about artificial intelligence and how to distinguish that from something called AGI or artificial general intelligence. But this is a broad definition that I think is highly accessible. We'll talk more about OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT. But I think most people know what a chatbot is. So it's like a chatbot, but more advanced. It was released in November 2022, so pretty recent. And it can answer complex questions. It can do language translation and generate complex text, including essays and creative writing. This is part of what separates ChatGPT from other like technologies, the level of complexity and the level of understanding of natural language. You can test ChatGPT out for yourself at chat.openai.com. And you can enter any of these example prompts to get a quick demo. Okay, let me demo how ChatGPT might produce complex text that a traditional chatbot might not be able, would definitely not be able to do. Okay, so I entered a prompt that you would find in entry level, maybe remedial, even some comp and ret courses. So in this example, I asked it to write a 5-paragraph essay comparing and contrasting iPhone and Android. And this is a simple kind of essay you would find in entry-level college courses, and it does a decent job at that. It's somewhat superficial, it's somewhat generic, but the fact that it can do this is kind of amazing and definitely relevant to educators, teachers, professors, everywhere. This is the About section for OpenAI. They are the team that developed ChatGPT. OpenAI is an AI research and deployment company. Um, their mission is to ensure that artificial general intelligence benefits all of humanity. Artificial general intelligence is different from artificial intelligence in that it is general. The type of intelligence that you and I think about is general. So a person can get really good at chess or can get really good at tennis, can get really good at math or can get really good at poetry. And some people are good at multiple things. Currently, AI is good at a particular thing, whether it's chess or any of the other things that I talked about. Although I'm not familiar with many AIs playing tennis, but artificial general intelligence is really interesting because this is an intelligence that is as smart or smarter than people. And of course, with that, there are many concerns. And recently, there was a push to um, pause AI research because these technologies are coming about a lot faster than people had anticipated. And kind of by definition, it's hard to know where superintelligence is going to go. So more on this point, this is Larry Page, co-founder of Google, and he had this to say about Google. Well, the ultimate search engine is something as smart as people or smarter. For us, working on search is a way to work on artificial intelligence. Um, this was quoted in a great article called Is Google Making Us Stupid? Definitely worth a read. And there are many things that dovetail nicely with this presentation and this overall topic. But the reason I wanted to draw your attention to this is to understand that for a long time, um, we humans have been working on creating something that is sort of the ultimate invention, if you will, the ultimate technology. And in my view, the ultimate technology is something that is smarter than we are. And I think, you know, given how many people are working on this and how fast this is developing, it seems very likely that AGI will come about at some point. When that is, I'm certainly not the right person to um, speculate on that with any authority. But if I had to speculate, uh, I think it's sooner than probably most people think. Um, but still, when talking about ChatGPT, I just want you to understand that these technologies are developing. They are becoming smarter. So anything that we say about ChatGPT and how it is now um, relates to not just its current state, but moving forward. And of course, here's Google's BART. Like ChatGPT, you can use both and see which one is better for the types of tasks that you uh, want it to do. I've used both and have found that in some tasks, ChatGPT is a little bit better. In other tasks, BART is better. It's hard to say um, whose AI is going to be better, whose LLM or large language model is going to be better. Google certainly has a very powerful large language model. Um, but like I said, these technologies are going to continue to evolve. Any kind of static thinking, um, I think, is myopic or short sighted. This section is going to be the hardest to talk about for me because I'm not a computer scientist, um, obviously. And so I did, my due diligence. I did my research, and so this is simplified language um, about how ChatGPT works. First off, ChatGPT is based on a large language model, which is a type of computer program that uses AI to generate human-like responses to text-based input. You input text, it will give you a human-like response. In my opinion, these things are not sentient. Uh, Most people in the field don't think that these things are sentient, but they're really good at seeming to be human. And part of that reason is how it understands language or how it uses language. So a large language model has been trained on a massive data set of human language. which it uses to analyze input and predict the most likely word or sequence of words to follow the input prompt based on statistical patterns learned from the training data. This might seem a little complicated, but it's kind of simple um, when we're talking about the big picture. So if you've ever texted, you know that, well, many smartphones will have a feature that will give you a suggested word for the next word to type. So instead of typing out that next word, it suggests what the next word is, trying to sort of complete what you're trying to say. The way it does that is that it uses, to my understanding, well, to simplify the language a little bit, it's using probability and statistics to predict, in other words, math. I think the math here is more complex than maybe your typical uh, statistics math class, but it's using basically probability to determine the next likeliest word to complete the thought or to complete the sentence. The fact that it's trained on a massive data set is also important because data sets can bias the language model. So ChatGPT has been accused of having a left bias. Um, Part of its data set includes the New York Times and Wikipedia. Um, and so, hence, these things can lean a certain way. I think another point that I don't want to leave out is there's a natural training that happens, um, which is sort of like how a baby learns, where a massive amount of data is kind of dropped on the lap of ChatGPT. This happened for about a year or so, if I'm not mistaken, around 2020, 21. And ChatGPT was able to learn from that. There's a sort of a reverse engineering of how the brain works. There are these things that mimic neural networks, like the brain, right? Uh, the brain has networks of neurons, and computer engineers try to mimic this to create something that kind of can learn. And um, and I mention this because there's an interesting analog here to how humans learn. So we learn as babies, we also learn in school. And ChatGPT has something similar. It learned through discovery, but then there was a period of training that took place. And and I also mention that because biasing can happen both in terms of the data, but also in terms of the training. So things to understand, right, when using these things. Um, and how they can be biased and how they came about and how they work. The response is generated using a process called sampling, where ChatGPT randomly selects words from its learned probability distribution to create text that is grammatically correct and coherent. So it randomly selects a word. Um, it's kind of difficult to explain like learned probability distribution, but basically, as a result of its training, it has learned um, what words are more likely to be associated with each other. It understands context as well as denotation, right? Definitions. And again, it's this probability thing, right? It's trying to follow that word with the next likeliest word, and the next likeliest word. And because there's like a random element of this, that means that in part, the responses are never going to be exactly the same or very unlikely to be exactly the same, which is cool because this generates novel um, information, and it can certainly feel very authentic. So I don't think it's quite fair to just call this thing the plagiarism machine, borrowing on the knowledge of people. It does seem to, again, when you look at what computer scientists say about this sort of thing, understand context, analyze language in a sophisticated way, and generate novel information, or at least novel phrasing. Okay, now how can students use ChatGPT? I want to separate this section into like three main parts: research, writing, and collaboration. There is overlap, keep that in mind, but let's dive into these three areas. Here are some research do's and don'ts. Again, my views. This is not a pedagogical approach that was derived at after intense academic discussions. Um, but yes, many informal academic discussions were had. And I think this is pretty reasonable. Of course, take what is useful um, and make it your own, as Bruce Lee said, sort of. Here's some do's, in my opinion. Learn more about your topic. You can use ChatGPT to learn more about your topic. Because ChatGPT has large data sets and understands complex language use, you can ask complex questions about your topic that normally would trip up Google or would take too much time on Google. Um, and again, this is just a good way of getting some basic information about your topic. It can help you find sources. Now, this is not without controversy. There are some don'ts that relate to each one of the do's. So, um, you know, I know there's some academics maybe if they're watching this who, want to maybe jump out of their seat to talk about why that might be a bad idea. But it can find legitimate, good sources that would take you a while to find on your own. It can also generate summaries of academic papers and really just of any kind of complex text. I have been using this recently and find this to be extremely useful. Sometimes you get like just a big article and you just want like cliff notes or a short summary to understand if this is useful, if this is or what the main idea is. And ChatGPT is fantastic at doing this. It's great at summarizing content. Now, with that said, let's look at the don'ts. While you can learn more about your topic, you don't want to take ChatGPT's word as gospel. ChatGPT does generate errors. Um, OpenAI is very open about that, no pun intended. And yeah, and I've noticed that. I've noticed this myself. Um, you have to or don't forget to check the sources to verify that they're legitimate. Um, I have personally seen and have had people, educators, um, tell me about their experiences using ChatGPT, testing it out, asking it for sources, and ChatGPT will fabricate sources. It will also fabricate quotes. Um, and this is actually pretty funny when you see it in action because it does it in a very convincing way. And unless you look into it, you really wouldn't know. So please look into it if this happens. And then finally, just because ChatGPT can summarize academic papers, um, that doesn't substitute what you gain from actually reading these papers. So this is maybe more for students, but hopefully I can convince maybe an educator to um, to think about using this technology. It can be used for good. I mean, that's part of my argument here. And it can be used for bad, right? I'm trying to point out here positive and negatives, research, do's and don'ts. You can learn more about your topic, but you can also be fooled and get false information or biased information, as we talked about earlier. You can find sources, but you can also be given false sources, etc. Okay, so by understanding that, you can make your own decisions. Let's talk about some writing do's and don'ts. Do generate a basic outline of points. ChatGPT can help you save time by giving you an idea of how to summarize some of the points that you feed it that you're thinking about, and this can give you a great idea for how to structure something. And structuring might not be the most important thing for you, um, and so again, it can help save you time. Do generate a draft for comparison or for ideas. I really like this idea. And I'm going to make some assignments based on stuff like this, where I'll have students write a draft maybe in person or possibly at home. Uh, Doing more in-class work is an obvious way to sort of make sure that students are not using ChatGPT, but the nature of the assignment would be to like compare um, the student's draft with ChatGPT, and I think there can be a lot learned from that. Um, Now, some don'ts that relate to these twos. Um, while you can use ChatGPT to save you some time on writing, if you rely heavily on it, I think you're going to miss out on a lot of those skills that are super important, that are part of the that are part of college, that are part of learning, that are part of just being creative and a critical thinker. And so, like brainstorming, um, free writing, I would suggest instead of having it create a draft and edit it, you know, which I can see why maybe people who do blog posts and things like that might be more inclined to do something like that. I don't think that's a great idea for students. And again, one way that educators can prevent this is by having um, an assignment where students are comparing, um, their draft versus ChatGPT's draft, for example. Again, these are important skills. Those skills will atrophy if you're constantly letting ChatGPT do them, and I think that they're valuable. I think they're valuable skills. And of course, don't plagiarize. Um, Students will be very tempted to plagiarize. And as I showed in the beginning, it can do a passing job of many college, maybe freshman level, remedial level, ESL level uh, writing tasks. It can do it pretty well. And so students will be tempted to plagiarize for many reasons. And whether they lack confidence in themselves or whether don't have the they don't particularly care, that will be a significant problem. And I know that there are technologies that are being developed to help identify whether a piece of writing is likely to be AI generated. I think they'll probably remain imperfect um, because the way these things work, as I said, there's an element of originality and in them, and so helping students understand why it's so important to have these skills in the first place and giving them assignments that compare their work to ChatGPT's or that is in class helps to eliminate some of the possibility for plagiarism. And finally, collaboration. Do ask ChatGPT to make suggestions for improvement. I've done this a lot, and when it's good, it's good. The suggestions that it makes can be on content, on specifically the organization. It can make grammatical improvements, so that's very helpful. It can help you practice. This is more relevant maybe for I don't know, math or science, some of the sciences, some of the maths, um, but it can help you practice writing as well. It can give you prompts. Um, it can give you vocabulary quizzes if you'd like it to. So it can be your own little personal tutor. Do ask ChatGPT logistical questions to help you focus on the writing. Some of this I mentioned earlier, but I think that um, you can use ChatGPT to do some of the tasks related to writing that are not the most important that you need to get through in order to focus on the actual parts of the writing that are going to develop you as a writer. This could be um, if you're doing a narrative assignment and it's about some character that has an occupation that you're not familiar with. You can learn about that occupation or understand what someone in that occupation might do without having to spend a whole bunch of time researching that and then focus on what's actually important. In this case, the story. So in this way, even though this presentation is uh, aimed toward students and educators, it's also useful for creative writers. And I will probably make more content about large language models and creative writing. Don'ts. Um, don't replace the suggestions from ChatGPT to the perspective of others. I think it's still not as good as, um, you know, a decent person's point of view on your writing. Um, Maybe there are some people who are not super critical thinkers, and ChatGPT might be better. And it certainly depends on the task. Maybe a grammatical task ChatGPT is better at. But when it comes to actually giving you a human perspective, because ChatGPT doesn't have feelings, emotions, sentience, in my opinion, it can't replace that. And so, again, this is another temptation that might happen: is people might be tempted to not listen to or not want to ask for the perspective of other people because they feel like ChatGPT is good enough. Obviously, don't cheat on exams. ChatGPT can be used for that. And yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. Don't do it. It's unethical. And technologies are being developed to help identify that. Finally, problem solving is a fundamental um, attribute that is helpful to people. Often, when you ask people to define intelligence, they say something like the ability to problem solve. And it's an important skill in life. Life is full of problems. ChatGPT can't solve all of your problems. And it's a skill, it's an ability. And becoming overly reliant on these technologies in a way that deteriorates your skills makes you a weaker, less able person. The goal, I think, is to use these technologies to boost productivity without decreasing skills that are valuable. And that's really what I'm trying to get at here. Serious concern. Thinking it's thinking. Noam Chomsky and others made this point in the New York Times opinion piece, The False Promise of ChatGPT. The article mentions, among other things, that the way ChatGPT thinks and the way that people think and use language is different. Humans create explanations of the world, and we use language in that way. ChatGPT, quote, infers brute correlations among data points. So this is relevant because many students will think that ChatGPT is thinking because it seems to think. And the repercussions of that um, might be subtle initially, but the idea that they might substitute critical thinking with something that isn't really critical thinking, I think is alarming. Once again, ChatGPT doesn't have subjective experience. It has no feelings, no emotions. It has a limited context of the world and of culture. It has a limited understanding of language, right, with its understanding of irony and sarcasm. So educators ask students to think critically, relying on their subjective experience. Students will rely on ChatGPT to think critically for them, but it can't. But it seems to. Um, Once again, this might not seem like a big deal, but understanding that it's not thinking the way that you do, but it's playing a sort of language game um, is really important because there are ways that ChatGPT can give you incredibly inane responses to relatively simple questions. And I'll give you an example, as a matter of fact. So I started out by asking ChatGPT a simple question. Imagine you have an apple on a table. Say you take the table away instantaneously. What would happen to the apple? And I think the response is pretty good. It talks about how the apple would fall because of gravity. I asked it if the same would happen to other objects, and it did a pretty good job. It also said that the other objects would fall because of gravity. So then I asked it, how differently would I feel if it were a newborn baby instead of an apple? And it gave me this sort of weird answer that it doesn't really make any sense and kind of reflects the training probably. I asked it about how I would feel, and it gave me this thing. It did understand that the baby would also fall, just like another object would fall to the ground. But then it was kind of, you know, said that it was inappropriate, or blah 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 blah. So anyway, I followed up by being clear on my question. I'm talking about how I would feel as a human being, and it correctly answered that I would feel horrified and disturbed at the thought. I asked it why it failed to provide this answer the previous time that I asked it. And it said it misunderstood my question, which is fair. I think maybe it's possible for a person to understand that question. I promise I am getting to where this thing completely fails to understand basic logic. I then asked it if I were an artist, say Leonardo da Vinci, and the Mona Lisa were on the table instead, how would I likely feel? Curious if it understood the difference. To my surprise, it did understand that Leonardo da Vinci wouldn't feel too happy about its painting falling to the ground. Curious, I asked it, all right, if I were jealous of Leonardo, if I were a rival painter, how would I likely feel? Again, trying to see if this thing really understands, it creates explanations of the world. Again, to my surprise, it did a good job. Um, it said that my emotions, if I were a rival of Leonardo da Vinci, would likely not be the same as da Vinci's. It said I might even feel a sense of pleasure. Um, and so I thought that was pretty good and interesting. Here's where it starts to mess up. How might such an explanation change if I were in space and not on Earth, assuming we could breathe and are safe from existential risks? I think I had to add the caveats just to make sure that it understood. And it kind of failed here. But again, I kind of blamed myself for not being more specific with the question. It talks about how I would feel awe and wonder about being in space, blah, blah, blah. And that's really not what I was trying to get at. I was trying to get at in space, the object wouldn't fall, right? Because of gravity or lack thereof. So I tried to ask the question again. No, I mean, how would it change what would happen and how I would feel about it, as opposed to what would happen on Earth? And he or ChatGPT said the immediate consequences are the same in space as they would be on Earth. Okay, which is clearly not true. And then it talks about emotional and psychological impact. Doesn't quite make sense. Again, it talks about isolation and attachment and blah blah blah. Bizarre response. Finally, I ask it what would happen to the painting. Assuming that the Mona Lisa was not secured to the table or otherwise protected the table, if the table were instantaneously removed, the painting would fall to the ground, whatever surface was below it. Clearly, ChatGPT sucks at just basic logic, and that's really important to know. So really, that's the point that I'm trying to make, and that I used here this chat to illustrate. Thinking that is thinking is an insidious assumption, and we're not at AGI level yet, right? This thing is really convincing at being human-like. So based on all of the facts that we discussed and everything that I considered and researched and thought about, here are some basic conclusions that again reflect my opinion, but that I think will be useful. I think that large language models like ChatGPT and Google's Bard do pose a threat to educators, as we've talked about. Plagiarism is going to be harder to detect. Um, Students might come out of college, say, with less of an ability to even write. And by the way, you can say similar things about similar technologies like Grammarly and so on. However, I think it's pretty obvious that we can't go back. Um, this thing just is can help boost productivity, and at best, we can pause, maybe pause AI research, as many have been calling to do, including Elon Musk and Max Tegmark and so on. Um, that seems increasingly unlikely. Many have pointed out that the idea of pausing is kind of a prisoner's dilemma, right? If you pause, but other people don't pause, you're sort of giving the other people the advantage in a capitalist system. So I don't know whether we're going to pause. I think probably not, um, but I don't think we will go back. And like I said earlier, these technologies will continue to evolve and get better. So the future landscape, as far as I can tell, is going to be collaborative, human and AI. We will use AI just like we've been doing with everything else. Um, the best chess players are not humans or AIs, it's human with AIs. We carry around our cell phone and it's getting smaller and smaller. And at some point, a la Neuralink and so on, like they might be just part of us. Um, a bit of speculation, clearly, on my part, but if the future isn't human and AI, I have no idea what the future is going to be of work and so on. I do think at some point, AGI, artificial general intelligence, gets so good that if we're not merged with AI in some way, it's very easy to see that it's very easy to imagine that we would be left behind in some way. When humans and Homo sapiens evolved from, let's just say, less intelligent ape-like ancestors, we basically outcompeted them and absorbed them. And so super speculation on my part, but that's kind of what I'm here to do. So the educators, in my opinion, should embrace these AIs because students will use these things. It's ChatGPT, Google's Bard. These are free tools. Again, other companies will develop these things. They will get better. If you want to prepare students for this human AI future, I think you have to help them understand how to use these technologies. After all, the point is to prepare students is to prepare them for the future. So unless you disagree with me that the future isn't human AI in collaboration to create work to produce things, which I mean it kind of already is that. But if you don't think that, then take then you can forget what I have to say. However, given all the things that we discussed, I do think that educators should do so prudently. There are important skills that might atrophy as a result of not prudently using these technologies, such as idea generation and critical thinking. Furthermore, writing is more than just putting words on a page. They're your ideas, they're your creativity, they're your problem solving, or it is your problem solving. Um, it's personal. It comes from, it should express your voice. And these technologies, as we saw, produce pretty generic results. And so please, 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 if you're going to use these things, if you're a student or a writer, understand how much potential harm you could be doing to yourself for the sake of productivity. These things can be used to make yourself more productive, but not at the expense of these important skills. And that is ChatGPT, a brief intro. I hope that assuaged some of your fears. These technologies aren't going anywhere. So I think we need to embrace them and learn about them so that we understand the pros and the cons. And that's it for me. So please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, hit the notification bell. All of that helps me out. It allows me to create more content. If you have a question about ChatGPT in an academic or writing context, put the question below, and I'd be happy to answer if I know the answer, and or just give my opinion. Thanks again, and until next time.